Hey freelancers, Ruby here. Since the run I posted for week 2 of the current Cataclysm event, many of you have asked me what my build is like and exactly how it works. Today I want to go over that with a few different possible options so you can set up a similar Interceptor build. I'll be covering everything from components to weapons as well as abilities. And since components make up the core of this build, I'll start there to try and provide the best explanation to how this setup works. Starting off, we have Emergency Power. This is a core component you want for this build. It is primarily used to boost the damage of our ultimate, but in a lot of cases, it lets us use our ultimate more freely and as more of an offensive tool rather than a defensive one. With the perk of granting a full recharge at low health every 2 minutes, it gives us a pretty good safety net to work with as well. As far as inscriptions go, on mine, they are not ideal, but I can make use of the weak point damage roll to get more damage out of my weapons. Next up is Elusive Talisman. While this is mostly here to prevent us from running out of ammo at any point, it does provide a solid boost to weapon damage, which boosts both our guns and melee. In my case, Elusive Talisman doesn't have the most ideal descriptions. It does provide a solid boost to health and ammo pack drops, and health packs are quite useful to this build since we do run Symbiotic Surge. Speaking of Symbiotic Surge, this in particular is really core to the build. It gives a lot of extra health over our normal components, letting armor inscriptions provide just a little more. More importantly, whenever I pick up a health pack, I get 50% increased damage. This boost applies to everything, guns, melee, and yes, your ultimate as well. Mine also happened to roll a solid ultimate damage roll, and alongside some weak point damage, it makes it really good for my setup. With Elusive Talisman's inscriptions, I get increased chance of getting health drops, so I can maintain this a bit easier than standard. Next up is the Interceptor component that's run on basically all DPS builds, Vengeance Matrix. This is mostly run for the damage component, however the Masterwork passive does also help us out when we get to low health, especially if you opt for Blades of Warding for your melee. I also happen to roll a ton of resupply here, which means more health packs, though I'd still much prefer different rolls. Finally, the last core component of the build, Soften Blows. I use this mostly for the defensive side of things, especially with the Masterwork passive. Just like Vengeance Matrix, it works really well with Blades of Warding, but it's okay even without. It really helps you keep emergency power from proccing too soon, or in a time you really don't want it to, by increasing your effective health through damage reduction. Now, onto the last component slot, there's a few options here. Personally, I used Extended Sniper Magazine, at least until the recent rotation. With the new weapons, I find myself using my sniper much less. However, if you do have a good sniper and wish to still use it, you definitely can. Mine rolled weapon damage and cooldown for my second ability. My new default for this slot is Wave Integration. Wave Integration can further boost our ultimate damage, and since I typically throw in Target Beacon and Serpent's Veil before using my ultimate at any point, it provides a nice boost to ultimate damage. Mine also happens to have rolled ultimate speed, so that's beneficial to our build as well, giving us more uptime on our ultimate. The last option for this slot, in my opinion, is Bloodlust. While Bloodlust does not provide any boost to the Interceptor ultimate, it does give you a bit of power if you have a good melee and want to use that over your other weapons for killing. In my case, mine provides a decent offensive and defensive boost with shield and a further increase the melee damage. Moving on to abilities, Serpent's Veil is a must-have for your first slot. Between being an excellent and quick primer, it also provides the Acid status debuff, which further increases all of our damage. It's really hard to pass up. In case of inscriptions, you want to find this with 2 or 3 charges, and the rest being Jav-wide stats. The damage it does is pretty unremarkable and is mostly used for the previously mentioned status in priming. In my case, I rolled recharge for my abilities, and support, which do help a decent bit. My other ability is Specter's Flash. I use this because it can both prime and detonate, which allows it to build ultimate quite fast. If you opt to use Ralner's Blades, as I originally did, it will let you spread a fire prime and allow you to more easily maintain a fire aura, which is easily one of the Interceptor's best auras for Cataclysm with its high damage. Mine does not have optimal rolls, but it can still be used to build ultimate quickly. Ideally, I'd want a high damage roll to complement its high base damage, along with charges or gear recharge to have it often enough to be able to maintain aura without having to run Blades of Warding. And finally, the support slot is really a no-brainer. We use Slayer's Furor for the debuff that can stack with Acid for even more damage output. The Master perk is a nice bonus as it lets you mark an entire pack and not have to worry about where it bounces to nearly as much. Finally, we're on to weapons. Especially with the new weapons coming out, we have some good options here now, but I'll stick to the ones I've gotten decent rolls for and have been using with my build. Since melee is limited to just 2 options, I'll start there. Personally, I recommend Blades of Warding for the best experience with this build. It'll make you fairly durable and less reliant on huge stacks of armor. It also synergizes with both Soften Blows and Vengeance Matrix perks to essentially stop most incoming damage for short periods of time. Mine has a decent damage and a bit of defensive stats to help out. However, Deathstalker Blades are a more risky but higher damage option if you prefer melee. You lose the damage reduction but gain a good amount of damage against enemies below half health, which conveniently is right about where a combo will generally leave them depending on the enemy. For guns, the original setup I ran was Ralner's Blades and Wyvern Blitz. Ralner's was mostly an armor stat stick, but was also used to ground Valkyries with the fire status it can inflict. It also helps for clearing Wyverns around the map since the elemental procs make them explode as well. Wyvern Blitz was the heavy lifter of the 2 weapons, providing DPS while my ultimate was down, and to snipe Valkyries from the storm for extra points. With the new weapons though, I'm still kind of playing with what works. So far I've settled on Rainmaker for a bossing and named Valkyrie weapon, and Flashfire as a stat stick and shield remover for the unnamed Valkyries. I tried Gravedigger and wasn't very happy with it even though I had a 400% roll on it. Riza's Reaper is another option for boss damage, but is much worse at handling shields. And if I look into a decent lightning rod, I may try that just for clearing small groups of enemies, otherwise I think I'm okay with what I got for now. So, with all the gear covered, it's time to talk about how to actually play this build. It's really straightforward. You build your ult by clearing weak enemies with combos and melees and your gun, and then you use ultimate, preferably for bigger things like turrets, brutes, and Valkyries. Of course, you can essentially use your ult whenever it's up as well, which can be recommended as long as there's a few bigger enemies to kill or a ton of small ones you can carve through. This is just mostly so if emergency power does trigger, it's actually giving you a full charge rather than nothing at all. The way I use my current gear setup is like this. I toss in target beacon followed by a Serpent's Veil, and then I detonate the pack I just primed with Serpent's Veil using Specter's Flash to get ult charge as well as an aura up for extra damage. And then I drop in and start using my melee or use my ultimate if it's up. Since the ultimate builds pretty quickly this way, it has a pretty high uptime. If you use a weapon for a prime to get a different aura or a different ability over Serpent's Veil for a different aura, you may need to change things up. Like for example, when I want to use a fire aura, I use Ralner's to proc that, and then toss in the beacon and Serpent's Veil. It's a build that heavily focuses on ultimate uses, so a good primer and detonator combo are highly recommended to build it faster. In my case, it's Serpent's Veil and Specter's Flash. You could use Sudden Death if it works better as a detonator for you. You can sacrifice a bit of damage and combo potential and use Absolute Zero for Ice Aura and a decent way to ground Valkyries without guns. You could even use Lightning Rod alongside Veil as a secondary detonation option. With the heavy focus on ultimate, however, this does mean you want some focus on ultimate damage for inscriptions, but I found my setup to work just fine with a total of around 75% between emergency power and 1 inscription to be good enough damage. Gear score gives you quite a decent amount of base damage. This build, however, is still flexible to the degree that you can be a glass cannon or for good durability for damage, all based on inscriptions. Overall, it handles GM3 quite well, and I'm happy with it. I definitely recommend this setup for anyone who's looking to play Interceptor in the early stages of GM2 or GM3. It's safe and reliable in the regard that as long as you get used to the playstyle. And that wraps up this build. Before I end the video though, I do want to give a huge thanks to my Guildmate Snowstar for the basic concept and setup for this build. I need to give credit where credit is due, and they're the one that introduced me to this build. With that said, see you around, freelancers.